Well, welcome to another session. I don't know if you're feeling the Friday feelings. It's a Friday. I am excited. I am happy. And I feel great. I hope you do. As always, delighted as always to have you join. Today is going to be an interesting session. Whilst I get myself all set up, let me perhaps put a disclaimer before I begin. All of you who are in your feelings, snowflakes, unable to listen to a different point of view, those who seem to have a habit of taking offense before it is given and holding on to offense even when none was actually on the table, this is not a session for you. That's my disclaimer. That's my snowflake alert. You can exit stage left now because today's session is going to be on fire. I am going to say a few things that, for those who run their logic through their emotions, you might find today's session a little bit difficult. Now, I titled today's session, What We Hear as Men About Ourselves on a Daily Basis. Now, except you've been living under a rock, and except you have no concept of the idea of the masculine image, or you've never heard of something called the ethnic image, except you've been under a rock and just perhaps in La La Land, you've certainly been made aware of how society perceives you, primarily through the lens of one particular group. We hear a lot of words these days being used. Toxic masculinity, the patriarchy, male privilege, dominance hierarchy, misogynist, sexist, and the list goes on and on and on. Now, before I start today's session, let me just say this. As a man, whenever you hear such things used towards you, or used towards a group, a tribe for which you are associated with, whenever you hear such words used explicitly or implicitly, covertly or overtly, just know you are on the side of the angels. You're winning. And you're winning big. Big, huge. Let me go and start today's session by saying a few things. Only in the modern West can men be labeled for the qualities they have, which their forefathers and the generations that came before them possess, but also which, if you travel across geographies, ethnicities, across historical times, the same qualities were present in other men and were responsible for not just the success, but the sustenance of the entire race, group, people. Only in the modern West, over the past 50, 60 years, have we taken what was normal, admirable, something that was esteemed, and we've converted such qualities, personality traits, behaviors, decorums, we've taken all of that and we've labeled them in pejorative ways, using ad hominem or using them as ad hominem attacks towards men. Only in the West. Only in the West. Over the past, some time ago, let me put it that way, I'm sitting down with loved ones and we start a conversation. And the conversation carries on for a short while, and I interject and I simply say, well, these are first world problems. And everyone is staring at me, recognizing that these are indeed the conversation we were having were first world problems. These are conversations people have when they've actually extended past the bottom of Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You have security, your physiological needs are met, your emotional needs are met, you're moving towards self-esteem and self-actualization, so much so that you see people who are in the West, who have all the benefits that other people lack, and sit on their high chairs and criticize things that we should be celebrating, or things that other people would die to have, only in the West. Now, what we've seen over the past 60 years has been an attack on the masculine image, on the masculine frame, on masculinity in general. So much so that we have seen this come from, and the question is, where has this come from? Well, it has come from women. Initially, it came from the feminist movement. I consider myself a feminist. At its very basic core, feminism was about choice. Now, I began my studies understanding the movement and the journeys of the suffragettes. It was about choice, treating each other as equals, respectfully, and recognizing the value in the next person. It was about choice. Initially, what we had was women saying, I am a woman, I have a voice. That's all it was. What we then saw was a transition. Like all things, you can take things to its logical extreme. It morphed from I am a woman, I have a voice, to I am a woman, now hear me roar. Then it morphed into I am a woman, I have been wronged. And today, I am a woman, I am supreme. Women have been the ones who have pushed the narrative, the name shaming of men in the West. Oh, he's toxic. Oh, he's a misogynist. Or he's sexist. Or he's toxically masculine. Or he's got male privilege. He's too dominant. He's too traditional. We've heard it all. Now, what is sad is that over the 60 years, we have seen fewer men in the family. So we've seen the family unit destroyed, family values thrown away, and more children are being born in the West to single parent families, primarily women. And we've then seen women raising men with the same intensity of anger, frustration, and taking those ideas and putting those ideas into their sons, so much so that we've raised 2-3 generations of men who are now standing with women, chanting the nonsense about men who built this country and who created the civilization and who have maintained the civilization. Men every day who go out, some of which give their lives for the country they love, the land they love, the family, the people they love, but more importantly, to ensure that there is a lineage, a gift, an inheritance for the next generation. We've seen women stand and call these men names. And what is the most appalling, the most disgraceful, is we've seen the generations born by the same women who began the movement stand by their women. We call them weak men, fem men, beta men, men who never really got the opportunity to see a father, a man, never got to understand and never raised with standards, therefore got their self-identity and image from their mothers, from the women around them, never got the opportunity to see the opportunity or to experience the opportunity of rough play with a man, rough and tumble play, boundary enforcement, structure, discipline, delayed gratification, and therefore have no concept, were raised with no concept of the value of a man and what a man brings. So what we see in the West, and the attack on masculinity, any man these days who stands up for traditional value is labeled. I find it very fascinating. I mean, absolutely fascinating. Now, my perspective about why this has happened is slightly controversial. I would say as follows. The women who actually spout this perspective often fall into one of two categories. And the men who support in spouting this narrative fall into one of two categories. Number one, women who never had a good relationship with their fathers, never really had the love from their fathers, and therefore, despite the archetype of men from an early age, these were men who had fathers who had boundaries, who had discipline and structure, who had standards, and for whom their rebellious daughter's attitude was not to be tolerated, just as their rebellious son's attitude were not to be tolerated. These men had the same standards for their sons as their daughters, and their daughters grew to resent these men. They used different labels. The second group are men who were raised into the generation of softer men by women, and therefore were raised to be feminine in their disposition and never had any boundaries, never had any standards. Let me take a step back. The first group we've identified as men who had standards. The second group are women who were raised by men who were feminine in their disposition and traits, who those men never had fathers in the family, therefore never had the opportunity to understand the value of discipline, boundary enforcement, boundary setting and enforcement, structure, delayed gratification, and play, roughhousing. These women who became daughters of the men in question always found that whenever they met men who were not like their fathers, in whatever shape or form, they labeled those men toxic. Why? Because the archetype that they were exposed to from a young age was a weak man. Now, remember, men fall into two groups. I'm not necessarily talking about men who are nurturers. You can have a nurturing father and a father with a nurturing disposition, a softer disposition, rather than, you might say, a provider, protector disposition. That's perfectly fine. But there are fathers who have a nurturing, softer demeanor, but they recognize and they still have the attributes and they understand the importance of the other traits. And even if they cannot provide those traits, they do so through other people. Boy Scouts, high school coaches, football coaches, sports coaches, uncles, friends. The first group, women, who struggled all of their lives because they never really had the love of a father. Or sometimes they never got the love of a father in the feminine language. They thought the masculine love language was appalling. Group two, women raised by feminine men who never really got the love and structure of a man, and therefore were raised as women, behave like women, have the same mannerisms and disposition as women. Those are the two sources of this attack on masculinity. Now, the question therefore is a simple one. If you are a man in the West or a man in the East, whether you're from the North or the South, when you hear such words, what do you do and how do you respond? Let me give you mine. I hope you take this to heart. It's a simple recommendation. You wear it as a badge of honor. You wear it as a badge of honor. It simply means you stood for something, you stand out. It also means you are more and have more in common with your ancestors than you do with modern men. From the 1960s, that covers a period, and in many ways the baby boom generation, 65 to be honest, all the way to today, we call those modern men and modern women. These are people who have trivialized and thrown away all of the great inheritances that their parents, forefathers gave them. Western civilization, Judeo-Christian values, the understanding of the scientific method, the rule of law, the ability to dialogue, debate, the ability to understand the difference between logic and reason, the difference between logic and emotion, and the role that each plays in a society, and how we can have thoughtful disagreements but still maintain a meaningful relationship. How we can disagree without being disagreeable. How we do not call names to people who have views that are different from ours. Those were the inheritances. All of that thrown away by the modern, liberal, experimental approach, fueled by empathy rather than logic. So my charge to you is wear it as a badge of honor. And let me deviate, let me segue and talk about something that I think is fascinating. I find this very, very fascinating. We tend to see adjectives used when describing men these days. We also tend to see adjectives being used when describing women. Whenever a woman is described in a certain way, or whenever a woman talks about her choices, we call that empowering. We call those preferences. We call her choices standards. For example, a woman can say with a straight face, I will not date a man who does not make more than £60,000 in the UK, with a straight face. The reason a straight face is needed is because the median income in the UK is £32,000, median. So what she is looking for is a man who is earning almost 100% above the median income, with a straight face. If you ask modern women between 18 and 30, they will tell you they want a man who is amongst or within a year or two from their age to be earning the same amount that I just described, £60,000. You want him at 25 earning £60,000. You want him at 22 earning £60,000 with a straight face. And when we hear that, what we generally say, well, which rightly so, is, well, that is her choice. Those are her preferences. Those are her standards. And we call those women empowered. We say they are independent. We say they are strong. We say they know what they want. And they should not settle. A man of the same caliber, assuming we find a man who's 25, who earns £60,000, and we ask him, what do you want from a woman? And he says, well, I want her to be by height, perhaps average. The average height, 5'5", 5'4". He's happy with that. But he says, I have physical requirements. I want her to look in a certain way. The more natural, the better. I want her to be feminine. I want her to be within reason of her, what should be an ideal weight. We look at her height in kilograms, her height in foot, 5'5", and we just simply say, we take those two digits and we say, well, she should be around 55 kilograms. That's our ideal weight. And so I want a woman who is perhaps 55 kilograms plus or minus 5%. So from 55, she can go up to, who knows, maybe 57, or she can go down to 52.5. He also says, well, I like her to be fit. I don't want her to be unattractive. He describes what he wants from a visual perspective. The moment he finishes his statement, he's labeled. He automatically is given a name, fat shaming. He's given other names. Why? Because men these days are not expected to have choices. We're not expected to have preferences. We're not expected to have standards. Now, woe be unto that man if he says, well, I also do not want you to be a hoe. I want some chastity, some purity, some decorum. I don't want to hear on the streets that you've been the village bicycle. He's labeled. A woman's choices and preferences are praised. A man's choices and preferences are demonized. We take women and we take their past. We hear things such as, well, you should accept her as she is. A woman's past will be used to exonerate her, to glorify her, to praise her, to put her on a pedestal. Look at what she has overcome. She was 170 pounds, or rather, make it more real. She was 170 kilograms at 5'5", and now she's lost all that weight, and she's 67 pounds. She has lost more than 100% of her body weight. She should be celebrated. The same man, had he been 200 kilograms, it's quite heavy, and had he lost 125 kilograms, and therefore weighing 75 kilograms, and let's assume he is 5'9", we would have asked a simple question. Why did he eat himself into that weight in the first place? And he doesn't need any celebration because he has simply returned back to something that was more reasonable on a height, weight adjusted basis. A man's past is used to demonize him. A man's future and preferences and choices are used to demonize him. A woman's is used to glorify her. Only in the West can words such as strong, independent woman be used and accepted. Oh, she's a strong, independent woman. Men cannot use that. Why? The moment a man says, well, he's a strong, independent man. Sexist, misogynistic, dominant, patriarchal, hierarchical, and any other adjectives we can find. Why? Because men have been reduced so much that we are told that we are nothing, and we should not have preferences, and that we should fit into the new world order and the creation that women have come up with. We should feel like women. Women these days are expected to be communicated to by men in a language that is feminine. If you communicate directly, again, your code names. If you communicate directly and forthrightly, you're labeled too dominant, too assertive, too aware of what he wants. What do these women want? And what do they want for their sons and their daughters? They want the bumbling men, the Boris Johnson type men, intelligent and smart, but they want you to behave like a buffoon. If you dress properly, and if you speak properly, and if you carry yourself properly, and if you have expectations and standards, and if you will not lie down and roll on the floor like an idiot, you're called too dominant, too strict, too possessive, toxic. You're told you have issues. Why? You held on to the traditional gifts and inheritances of your forefathers, where men were supposed to be gentlemen and have decorum and speak in a certain manner. And here is the key thing: have certain skills. The ability to work a trade, work with your hands, if needed, work with your fists. All of those are seen as toxic. The baby boom generation were the ones who said, we don't need war. The great generation, the silent generation, had seen too much wars. The baby boom generation said simply, we want peace. We want happiness, we want love, we want feelings, we want self-esteem. So everything is all about feelings. These were the generations that actually planted the seed of destruction in the West, simply based on forcing people and training their sons and daughters only to focus on feelings. It's all about how you feel. Now, there was a time in this country when offense had to be given. If it was given, it had to be received. When it was received, it had to be accepted. I could sit down with people who I do not agree with, both on economic issues, social issues, political issues, theological issues, psychological issues, historical issues. And even if offense was given and received by my presence, I didn't have to accept it. I could simply shake the dust off your feet and carry on the conversation. Why? Because it was always something bigger than yourself. You always left room for the possibility and the potentiality that your position was wrong. Now, I knew growing up, and I still know today, that there are more things I do not know than there are things I do know. So I walk around with the humility. Now, I speak very forthrightly, no doubt. I speak assertively, no doubt. But it doesn't come from a place of self-deceit or elitism. It comes from self-assurance. I was raised by a great mother and a great father. I was taught and told, you are not superior to any person on this earth. And no one is more superior than you are. Inferiority and superiority are opposite sides of a coin, and that coin is a counterfeit. So, do not scratch when you don't feel an itch. Do not bend when you don't have to pick something up. Sit up straight. Show yourself a man. Be proud of who you are. Be proud of where you've come from. Be proud of your inheritances. And when you meet people, be cordial in your conversation. But if you believe in something, don't leave the table and people say, well, what did he actually believe in? And what does he think? Say your piece and always leave room for the potential that you can correct your position. So, when I meet people, I do not change to the environment, to the majority's personalities, like numbers and letters. I have integrity. We call them characters. What you see in the dark is what you see in the light. I don't move or bend to make you feel good. You're entitled to your own feelings. We call it self-esteem because it comes from self. You want peace? Give yourself peace. You want happiness? Give yourself happiness. It's not my intention to give you any of the two, and it's not my intention to rob you of anything either. As grown-ups, when we have conversations, and as I speak and as I teach on my channel, I understand that I am trying to resolve thoughts and processes publicly. I don't edit my videos for a reason. They are my thoughts. They could be wrong. And I risk offense by speaking very freely. I'm not in chains. I'm not your slave. Never will be. I speak freely. Now, here's what's interesting. When I turned 29, I got to a point in my life where I had reached financial freedom. I was financially independent. And for close to 2 decades, or going on 2 decades, I have had the rare privilege of understanding the feeling of not being able to be controlled. Very powerful, freeing feeling. The idea that I can be my authentic self. I can be direct. I can be kind, but I didn't have to be fake. That no one person controlled my destiny. Therefore, I could be me. Now, Bob Hope once said, if I have to be free, I've got to be me. Not the me that my father thinks I should be. Not the me that my mother or my brothers or my sisters think I should be. Not the me that you think I should be. If I have to be free, I have to be me. But I have to learn and understand who me really is. Men who've come to an awakening of who they are, who have a sense of purpose, a destiny, who have a sense of structure, discipline, and identity, are the ones who are labeled all of these silly adjectives and names. Why? We don't bend when we don't have to bend. We don't scratch when we don't feel a scratch or itchy. We will not fall to the labels. We are who we are. Most importantly, we're proud of who we are. Now I'm going to say something that will irritate, and I do so intentionally. Offense is being given now. Take it. Since the 1960s, we've seen the vaginification of the West, the feminization of the West. So much so that men these days are changing the agenda because they're confused. Men these days are having to speak like women because they so crave the praise and adoration of women, and they were raised by feminists, womanists, now the extreme ones, and raised with no fathers, so they have no sense of the masculine burden of performance. They have no sense of what it means to be a man, and so when they see anything that does not resemble what they were told because of the absence of a real man in their lives, they are scared. And they stand in allegiance with women to attack men, for whom, if you removed all of us, the civilization, the ethnicity, the race, the people, die. We go back about 2 years, or a year ago. Yeah, about a year ago. Ukraine and Russia began their conflict. All of the women and children were asked to leave if they wanted to. All of the men were told that they would stay and fight. I had a conversation with someone a few days ago, and I said, where were the feminists who are all for equality? Where were the womanists who are all for empowerment? Where were they? Why didn't they stay and fight? Why didn't they say, no, men and women are equal. We are going to be here with you, our men, and we're going to fight like you. If you're going to draft the men, we need you to draft the women because we think it should be fair. Where were they? The men that we label as toxic, misogynistic, dominant, hard, strong, the men we label as part of the patriarchy, the men we call names were the same ones who are currently dying on the front line to defend the nation they love and the women they love, the families they love, the ancestry lineage that they inherited. Those men are the ones dying. Go back to the beaches in Normandy. We have generations like those men in Ukraine also dying. We go back 1,000 years. We had men also dying. Go back 2,000 years and 3,000 years and 10,000 years. We have men standing in, planting their foot on the soil and saying, we will give our lives because we love our nation, we love our family, we love our people. But our race, our lineage, our ancestry line must continue. So we will die to make sure that we push forward what we hold dearly, our society. Now, let me close today's session by addressing you weak men, beta males, fem males, soft men, all of you who are standing in allegiance with all this name calling. Let me speak to you directly. I wish, and I genuinely wish, that you had had different upbringing and that you were raised by a father who was kind, forgiving, generous, thoughtful, present. I wish you were raised by a father who was forgiving, a father who looked after you, cared for you, told you he was proud of you, and was willing to die for you. I wish you were raised by a father who you saw work hard, sweat, look into your eyes and tell you that you were important to him. Tell you that you were the most important thing that happened to his life. I wish you were raised by a father who was present, who identified boundaries, and who told you there were certain things you couldn't do to embarrass the family name. Someone who told you about the importance of respecting other people. Someone who disciplined you when you were, when you were naughty. Someone who did not spare the rod. And therefore, you grew up understanding consequences and why being upright was an important decision. Someone who taught you about honor and authority and how you should honor those in authority. Someone who provided a structure in your life. Perhaps taught you how to read and write. I wish you had all of that. Unfortunately, your disadvantage, or the absence by omission or commission of an archetype like that in your family, should not be a reason why you attack everything that looks like what you wish you had. It's okay to be a nurturer male and to be soft and to be kind as a man. It's okay, perfectly okay. But I would hope you also recognize that, like weaving a tapestry, there are different colors and there are different shades and shapes, and for you to come up with this beautiful piece, you are going to have people who are not like you. And rather than attack, why don't you get curious? Rather than join forces and label, why don't you be inquisitive? Rather than be frustrated, why don't you become fascinated? Why don't you learn? Why don't you go back and learn what you never had? And seek to be something that you never were. With the hope and in the hope that by applying some form of dispassionate analysis and openness, you can come up with compassionate solutions that are different to what you currently have, but you can actually come to understand that you're just like me. Save for the experience, save for the upbringing, placed in a different location, different environment. I am you, and you are me. To the men who keep being labeled, I say to you, never explain, never complain, don't offer apologies when you don't have to, and don't demand apologies. Sit up straight, keep your chin up, and march forward. The history books will show what side of the divide were on the side of the angels. Now, I hope that's been useful.